Namaskar, this is First Post and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. $100 billion. That's the kind of money US banks lost last week. Their market value fell dramatically. The reason was this: two banks failed in a matter of 48 hours. There was a bank run. Depositors made a beeline for their money. And this is not a developing economy I'm talking about. This is happening in the United States of America. Crisis is spreading through American banks. The government says the depositors will get their money back, but the global markets are feeling the jitters. Is this a repeat of the 2008 financial crisis? We'll bring you an assessment. Also on the show, the BBC's hypocrisy has been exposed yet again. The British broadcaster faced a boycott this weekend over the suspension of a prominent presenter. We'll tell you what happened. There's a lot of news in West Asia. The Saudi-Iran rapprochement brokered by China. What does it mean for China in the region, and what does it mean for the US? An analysis is coming up. Also, India is celebrating its Oscar win. First, the headlines. Chinese President Xi Jinping vows to make the military a great wall of steel. He said this during the first speech of his precedent-breaking third presidential term at the annual meeting of China's parliament. The Myanmar army has killed more than 25 people at a monastery in the southern Shan state. That's a claim made by an insurgent group. Myanmar has seen a spike in deadly battles between the military and armed resistance groups since the junta seized power in a coup. Pakistan has revealed details of foreign gifts retained by public office holders. This is part of the Tosha Khana scandal. The list implicates multiple figures, including Imran Khan, Nawaz Sharif, Asif Ali Zardari and Parvez Musharraf. They all acquired gifts free of cost and spent millions on gifts to foreign delegates. Nepal bans solo trekkers throughout the country 5 years after they banned solo climbers from trying to scale the Mount Everest. This is to save on the search and rescue costs incurred when solo trekkers go missing. And India win their fourth series in a row against Australia. Virat Kohli's 186 helps India draw the fourth and final test in Ahmedabad. India win the series 2-1. We start with the biggest headline in the world right now: America's banking crisis. It's a financial contagion, to be precise. Two banks have gone bust, two major banks back to back. They failed over the weekend. First, the Silicon Valley Bank, and then the Signature Bank. This one is based in New York. Yesterday, regulators had to shut it down. And these are America's biggest bank failures since 2008. You may remember the Lehman Brothers story of 2008. It triggered a global financial crisis. So the question is history repeating itself? Is another Lehman-like episode in the making? The bank closures have spooked the world. There are reports of steep losses. America's biggest banks have taken a hit. Last week, they lost a staggering $100 billion. On Vantage tonight, we'll tell you what happened, why it happened, and whether you should be worried. Wherever in the world you're watching us from, does it impact you? We start with the Silicon Valley Bank. Some of you may not even have heard of it. But if you work in the American startup space, you know this bank is a big deal. Silicon Valley Bank, or SVB, is the banker to the American tech industry. It was opened in 1983. Nearly half of America's tech and life sciences companies were its customers. These banks are backed by a VC or venture capitalist. A VC is someone who puts money in a company in return for a stake, like a big investor. So Silicon Valley Bank worked with American startups, and it was among America's 20 biggest banks. Now it has collapsed. The question is why? And this is the interesting part. For a bank serving the tech industry, the SVB collapsed in a rather old-fashioned way. There was a bank run. People were taking out their money. The bank could not pay its depositors. It went broke, and so regulators had to shut it down. Next question, why could it not pay its depositors? Where did the money go? You could say this was a perfect storm. It began when the pandemic hit. The internet became the world's lifeline. So tech companies made money. They became more valuable. They grew in size. They raised funding. And where did they take this cash? The funds that they raised, where did they put this money? In the Silicon Valley Bank. Just look at the numbers. Between 2020 and 2022, bank deposits at SVB, Silicon Valley Bank, tripled. From $62 billion, they jumped to around $175 billion, which means Silicon Valley was flush with cash. And these were not complex deposits. It was just money lying in a bank account. Think of it like your savings account or a fixed deposit. These tech companies trusted SVB to take care of their cash. And what does a bank do with its cash? It gives out loans. That's how banks make money. They take cash from depositors like you and me, and they use this money to give out loans. They charge an interest on the loan, and they give depositors a smaller interest. The difference is the earning of the bank. That's how it works. Basically, banks charge a higher interest on a loan that you take from them and give a smaller interest on the money that you deposit with them. The difference is theirs to keep. So this bank, SVB, was sitting on a massive pile of cash. It had to pay interest to its depositors. And like any bank, it gave out loans. Do you know who got these loans? The American government. The SVB bought government bonds, US treasuries. It's the safest form of investment in the world. But for this bank, it turned out to be a mistake. Last year, when fears of a recession grew, the US Federal Reserve, that's America's central bank, hiked interest rates. This made these US treasuries less attractive. Their value went down. So SVB took a major loss on its holdings. And around the same time, something else was happening. The tech sector was also in crisis. The fear of recession dried up their funding. So these tech companies began dipping into their savings. They went to SVB and they withdrew their deposits. They took out their money. Do you see what was happening? The Silicon Valley Bank was being squeezed. On one hand, its investments were in a loss. On the other, its customers wanted their money back. The bank needed cash, so it decided to dump some of its bonds. This caused a loss of $1.8 billion. Suddenly, everyone was nervous. Next thing you know, SVB customers began lining up outside the bank. They all wanted their money back. By then, it was too late. The bank was insolvent. It was out of money. The regulators had to step in. They had to shut down the bank. This is the second biggest bank failure in the history of the US. SVB's customers are in distress.
We can't pay our vendors today. What happens when tens of thousands of companies can't pay their vendors anymore because they don't have cash in the bank? We're facing something much more than just my company potentially collapsing, but something economically very dramatic.
The British government is concerned too. That's because Silicon Valley Bank had a presence in the UK as well. HSBC acquired it today. UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is visiting the US. When he arrived, the bank failure was the first thing he brought up.
Well, I understand the concern that people have got around what's going on with Silicon Valley Bank. That's why I've been working with the Chancellor all weekend and indeed on the plane flight over, talking to the Bank of England and our regulators about finding the best solution. The government will have more to say on this very soon, but what I want to reassure people is that we will continue to support our world-beating tech sector and all the high-class jobs that it provides, but also that our financial system is resilient.
And that was just one part of the crisis. On Sunday, part two played out. US regulators were seen in action again. They shut down another bank, Signature Bank in New York. It is in no way related to SVB. Signature was already a distressed bank, but what happened at SVB precipitated its fall. Signature Bank had made bets on the crypto market. It suffered major losses. The bank had lost 40% of its value. Its owners were looking for a buyer. They were trying to shore up their finances, but they failed. So the regulators had to step in again, and the headlines went from bad to worse. Signature is the third biggest bank failure in American history. What does the US government say? The US Treasury Secretary is concerned.
You mentioned Silicon Valley Bank. There are recent developments that concern a few banks that I'm monitoring very carefully. And when banks experience financial losses, it is and should be a matter of concern.
This is indeed a matter of concern. There is now a crisis of confidence. American banks have recorded major losses. Their stocks have nosedived. Last week, US banks lost $100 billion in value. European banks also saw losses. Their value declined by at least 50 billion. And what about the depositors? The good news is they will get their money back. That's because the deposits in these banks are insured. In fact, SVB depositors were supposed to get their money today. Those Signature Bank customers will have to wait, but they too will get their money. That's the assurance from Washington.
Americans can have confidence that the banking system is safe. Your deposits will be there when you need them. Small businesses across the country, the deposit accounts at these banks can breathe easier knowing they'll be able to pay their workers and pay their bills. And their hardworking employees can breathe easier as well.
But is that enough? What about the American banking system? There are doubts about its health now. The global markets are feeling the jitters. Asian markets opened in the red today. Indian markets suffered losses. Of course, there were other factors contributing to this. But the bank failures in the US dealt the worst blow. So should you be worried? Experts say while the developments are worrying, this may not be a repeat of the Lehman crisis, not yet. In the meantime, New Delhi is watching the developments in Washington. India's State Minister for Technology spoke out yesterday. His name is Rajiv Chandrasekhar. He will meet Indian startup founders this week. India will assess how the failure of Silicon Valley Bank may impact Indian startups. This is a developing story. We'll be tracking it for you. On to another story that we've been tracking through the weekend, the truce between Saudi Arabia and Iran. It came out of the blue, and even more surprising was the role of China. Beijing brokered this deal. The implications are clear. China is stepping up its game in West Asia, and it's shrinking America's sphere of influence. Can you call this a global realignment? Let's discuss. Starting with the Iran-Saudi Arabia détente. They're regional rivals, but last week they made peace. Riyadh and Tehran are restoring diplomatic ties and reopening their embassies after a gap of 7 years. Like I said, China brokered the deal. Top officials from Riyadh and Tehran met in Beijing. They spent 4 days in the Chinese capital. The outcome was this: a photo op and a truce. China stopped diplomat Wang Yi, flanked by Saudi and Iranian officials. This was a declaration of victory by China.
The representatives of 3 countries signed a joint statement. Saudi Arabia and Iran reached an important agreement and announced the resumption of diplomatic relations between the 2 countries. I think this is a victory for dialogue, a victory for peace, offering significant good news for today's turbulent world.
A victory of dialogue. China is bound to blow the trumpet on this one, but Beijing's role in this truce may be overblown. You see, Tehran and Riyadh have been working towards this for 2 years now. They were aided by different intermediaries like Iraq and Oman. So China is just one of the many intermediaries. It is not the sole player that brokered the peace pact, and yet it's a significant achievement, both for the region and for the world. Saudi Arabia and Iran were arch rivals. They have been on the opposite sides in the Yemen war as well as the conflicts in Lebanon, Syria and Iraq, not to mention the Shia-Sunni divide. The Saudis are a Sunni majority country. The Iranians have a majority of Shias. Tehran's pursuit of nuclear weapons spooked Riyadh. In 2016, there was an escalation. Riyadh executed a prominent cleric. It led to a strong backlash in Iran. Saudi diplomatic missions came under attack. Iranian protesters stormed the Saudi embassy in Tehran. In response, Riyadh snapped diplomatic ties, and tensions have been high ever since. But now Riyadh and Tehran are taking a step back. They're keen on dialing down hostilities. Do you know what this means for the US? A loss of face. It's the biggest political shift in the region, and America had virtually no role in it. Nonetheless, Washington has welcomed the truce.
We welcome any efforts to help end the war in Yemen and de-escalate tensions in the Middle East region. That is one of the reasons why the president, you saw him travel over the summer to have those conversations. De-escalation and diplomacy together with deterrence are key pillars of the policy that President Biden outlined during his visit in July in the region. So again, de-escalation, tensions in the Middle East clearly is a priority, and he welcomes that.
The White House tried to spin the story. The spokesperson was talking about this: Biden's frosty fist bump with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. It was embarrassing for the US president, to put it mildly. Biden had gone to Riyadh for a deal on oil. He came back empty-handed. And now the Saudis have signed a deal with Iran, that too in China. In fact, look at the recent events in the region. Turkey has normalized ties with Saudi Arabia. The relationship had broken down in 2018 after the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, but Ankara is warming up to Riyadh. Last year, MBS even paid a visit to Turkey. Then we have Qatar. Its relations with neighbors in the Persian Gulf have healed. And in both these cases, the US has been conspicuous by its absence. In fact, American diplomats have been snubbed, and the message from West Asia is quite clear. West Asian powers are taking control over their politics. They're trying to bury the hatchet and resolve old conflicts. This also opens up space for more normalization. Reports say Israel is engaging with the Saudis. There is a push to normalize ties and to build on the Trump-era Abraham Accords. Will that happen? It's hard to say. A lot depends on the man who holds all the cards in Riyadh, the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. There have been whispers of Saudi Arabia distancing itself from the US. Call it a decoupling, if you will. Saudi Arabia is changing posture. It is already a major player in West Asia, but now Riyadh has global ambitions. It is diversifying its economy, opening up its society, pursuing an independent foreign policy that isn't hemmed in by American interests. And most importantly, Saudi Arabia is relegating religion to a more personal space, not making it the driver of their economic and foreign policy. The man leading the shift is Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. He floundered for a while with the war in Yemen and the Khashoggi episode. But he's no more the pariah. He's a central player who doesn't want to operate in the shadow of the US any longer. Let me explain this with a quick recap. Saudi Arabia and the US have been allies for as long as one can remember. It was a symbolic relationship. The Saudis gave the Americans oil and the Americans repaid with military protection. No lectures on democracy or religious freedom. Those America kept for the rest of the world. So Washington got a steady supply of oil and Riyadh built its petrodollar regime. The Saudis did not question America's military operations. But in 2018, this arrangement suffered a big jolt. A Saudi-American commentator, Jamal Khashoggi, was murdered, allegedly by the Saudi regime. The US took this up publicly and promised to turn Riyadh into a pariah. Saudi Arabia did not like America's tone. Listen in to what its minister said last year.
The idea that one can impose values on other countries, His Royal Highness made clear, does not work. It has not worked when the US tried to impose values on Afghanistan and Iraq. In fact, it backfired. It does not work when people try to impose values by force on other countries.
Don't impose your values on us, said Saudi Arabia to the US. The US also refused to support their war in Yemen, the Saudi war in Yemen. The rift widened. Saudi Arabia found other willing partners like Russia and China. Russia is a big oil producer. It is part of the oil cartel called OPEC+. Last year, when America wanted the Saudis to dump Russia, they refused. Biden even traveled to the country he not very long ago called a pariah. But the Saudis did not budge. Meanwhile, China emerged as a big investor, also one that doesn't talk about democracy or human rights. Suits everyone. The Saudis conveniently shut their eyes to the plight of Muslims in China. Power politics, you see, is a game of convenience. So gradually, the US was edged out as the Russians and Chinese entered deeper into the fray. This is the decoupling with America. It's work in progress. And like we said, Saudi Arabia wants to be a global power. Its de facto ruler, the Crown Prince, has a vision. It's called Vision 2030. A plan to diversify the Saudi economy, make it less reliant on oil, more modern, more open. This week, the Saudis took the latest step to realize this vision. They've launched a new global airline. It's called Riyadh Air. It's meant to compete with the likes of Etihad, Emirates, and Qatar Airways. Crown Prince MBS has big plans. He wants to turn Saudi Arabia's strategic location into an asset. The kingdom is located between Asia, Africa, and Europe. It's a market with a lot of potential. Riyadh Air will serve more than 100 destinations around the world by 2030. That's the promise. Riyadh Air is expected to add $20 billion to Saudi Arabia's non-oil GDP. It will create 200,000 odd jobs, direct and indirect. They've hired aviation industry veteran Tony Douglas to execute the plan. He was previously the head of Etihad Airways. The idea is to get him to replicate the success of Etihad. But here's the irony. Do you know who's funding these big-ticket projects to move the economy away from oil? Saudi Arabia's oil giant Aramco. And it can splurge because Aramco has posted a record profit, a whopping $161 billion, a rise of more than 46% compared to 2021. So Saudi Arabia's mantra is clear. It won't abandon oil, but it won't rely just on oil to fill its coffers. And the plan makes sense. The biggest challenge for the rulers, though, will be the social transition. From a hardline Islamic nation that only sells oil to a kingdom that hosts music concerts and allows women to drive, Saudi Arabia is being liberalized. The dominance of religion is eroding. The latest proof is the list of Ramadan restrictions. Like I said, it won't be an easy transition, but it's a transition that must be made for a young country that has the financial resources and the regional clout to make a difference. Saudi Arabia is just getting started. And now let's talk about the BBC, the national broadcaster of the United Kingdom. It seems to be making more news than reporting it. You know, like gonzo journalism, BBC style. In case you're wondering what is gonzo journalism, it's when a reporter is no longer an observer, but an active participant in a story. The BBC has aced it. Here's the latest controversy with an unlikely protagonist, former English footballer and sports broadcaster Gary Lineker, the BBC's highest paid presenter, the host of a highly popular football show called Match of the Day. The controversy started, like most things nowadays, with a tweet. Lineker slammed a tweet by the UK government. It had a video message by Home Secretary Suella Braverman.
Enough is enough. We must stop the boats.
She was justifying the government's controversial migration policy. They're calling it Stop the Boats. Basically, it's a policy aimed at stopping illegal immigrants, deporting them to their home country or a third country like Rwanda. The policy is quite controversial. The Home Secretary was justifying it, and Lineker's response was typically British. Let me tell you what he said. I'm quoting. "Good heavens, this is beyond awful." He then went on to compare it to the rhetoric of Nazi-era Germany. Now, here's something I must tell you. Lineker's criticism is not unique. A lot of people in and outside of Britain have slammed this bill. The United Nations, for instance, said this bill will make Britain an outlaw. And Lineker slammed it too. He did this on his own Twitter page, not the page of the BBC sports show that he hosts. So this tweet basically was in no way connected to the BBC, nor did it involve them. But the preachers of impartiality just couldn't stay out of it. The BBC forced Lineker to quote-unquote step back from his duties as a presenter. Why? Because he'd apparently breached the BBC's guidelines on impartiality. Yes, the word they love to use, a little too conveniently, we say. This time it backfired. Lineker was taken off air. The BBC, which has long been criticised for serving the government's agenda, said that he'll be put back on the show, but only after, and I'm quoting, only after an agreed and clear position on his use of social media. What followed was a storm. The staff backed Lineker. Many other presenters and commentators refused to show up for work. On Sunday, the BBC's radio and TV coverage was badly hit. They were forced to scrap a large part of their weekend soccer programming. And this is right in the middle of the Premier League. Talk about a self-goal. The leadership is under pressure. There's severe public backlash, but the BBC's Director General, Tim Davie, has refused to resign. It was his decision to take Lineker off air. Now, the row has reached 10 Downing Street. Remember, the BBC is a public-funded broadcaster, but Prime Minister Rishi Sunak does not want to enter the story. This is what he said, and I'm quoting again. "I hope that the current situation between Gary Lineker and the BBC can be resolved in a timely manner, but it is rightly a matter for them, not the government." Interestingly, the Prime Minister did not forget to praise Lineker as, and I'm quoting, a great footballer and a talented presenter. So the government does not want to get dragged into this dispute, which leaves us with the broadcaster, once again exposed for its hypocrisy over impartiality. When BBC's boss Tim Davie took office in 2020, he declared a war on woke. What does that mean? A conscious attempt to tackle perceived left-wing bias. But the Lineker incident has exposed them again and given fresh ammo to critics who say the organisation is too close to the ruling party, the Tories.
The BBC is not acting impartially by caving in to Tory MPs who are complaining about Gary Lineker. They've got this one badly wrong, and now they're very, very exposed, as is the government, because at the heart of this is the government's failure on the asylum system.
Now, a sports presenter has been taken to task for his political views. You may remember that BBC offices in India were recently raided. This was over tax irregularities, but they painted it as an attempt to gag free speech. The same Tim Davie, the BBC boss, wrote an email to his staff then. He said, and I'm quoting, "Nothing is more important than our ability to report without fear or favour." Well, what happened now? Why can't Gary Lineker speak without fear against the UK government? Or does the rule only apply to former British colonies? Meanwhile, the chairperson of the BBC, Richard Sharp, is currently facing 2 investigations. He's accused of doing favours to former Prime Minister Boris Johnson in exchange for his job as a BBC chair. This turn of events is brutal. The BBC loves to preach. It talks about impartiality, speaking truth to power. It runs biased documentaries based on allegations which have been dismissed by the Supreme Court of India. It's like the broadcaster is running its own kangaroo court. But when the story hits home, it is quick to silence critics. This controversy has put them on the back foot. An agreement has been reached with Lineker. We're told he'll resume his duties from this weekend, but the BBC's dented reputation has taken another hit. Vantage continues after a short break.
Is being taken away by the law of the land. While you also had Law Minister Kiran Rijiju, he said that centre is not against personal choices and freedom, but since the issue involves the institution of marriage, it's a policy matter. Let's listen into the Law Minister.
Government is not interfering into the personal life, personal activities of anybody. So there should be no confusion or there should be no dilution on this matter. When it comes to an issue related to the institution of marriage, then it is a matter of policy. Personal freedom and personal activities of individuals, of the citizens, are never been questioned, disturbed or regulated by government.
Government continues to maintain that it's a policy matter best left to the party.
In Ukraine, the battle for Bakhmut is turning into a legendary tale. It's being called the toughest battle of our times. Apart from the barrage of gunfire and artillery shells, claims and counterclaims are also flying high. Ukraine says it has killed more than 1,000 Russian troops in recent weeks in Bakhmut alone. Russia says it killed hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers in a single day. So both sides claim to have taken heavy casualties. Where does that leave the scope for peace? An opportunity may arise later this year. Vladimir Putin may fly to India for the G20 summit. Will that present a chance for truce or set the stage for further confrontation between Putin and Western leaders? Our next report has more.
The small industrial town of Bakhmut in Donetsk is known around the world. Russia is pushing hard to capture this town. Ukraine says the fall of Bakhmut would pave an open road for Russian forces across the Donbas region. Here's how things stand in Bakhmut. Ukraine controls western Bakhmut. Russia controls the eastern flank of the town. And there is fierce fighting for the center of Bakhmut. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has made a big claim.
In less than a week, starting from March 6th, we managed to kill more than 1,100 enemy soldiers in the Bakhmut sector alone, which is Russia's irreversible loss. The loss right there, near Bakhmut. Furthermore, at least 1,500 more enemy sanitary losses, those whose wounds are incompatible with continuing the fight. Plus, dozens of units of enemy equipment were destroyed. Plus, more than 10 Russian ammunition depots were burned down.
1,000 Russian troops killed in less than a week. A powerful number from Zelensky, which has not yet been verified. Russia has its own numbers. The Russian Defense Ministry said its troops had killed more than 220 Ukrainian soldiers in just about 24 hours. Here's what it said in a statement. In the Donetsk direction, more than 220 Ukrainian servicemen, an infantry fighting vehicle, 3 armored fighting vehicles, 7 vehicles, as well as a D-30 howitzer were destroyed during the day. Russia has fielded the Wagner group to lead the assault on Bakhmut. Its head, Yevgeny Prigozhin, says the situation in Bakhmut is very difficult and that the enemy is fighting for every meter. Russia is closing in on the center of Bakhmut. Prigozhin says the closer his troops get to the center, the tougher the battle gets. Russia wants to capture Bakhmut using whatever means necessary. Ukraine is at a natural disadvantage. It has to keep defending Bakhmut for as long as it takes. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin may come face-to-face with Western leaders later this year. India will be hosting the G20 summit in September. Leaders from the 20 wealthiest nations of the world will fly to India. Russian President Vladimir Putin may be one of them. Reports say the Kremlin is working to clear Putin's schedule for September. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov was asked whether Putin would attend the G20 summit. He said, and I quote, "It can't be ruled out. Russia continues to participate fully in the G20 framework. It intends to continue to do that, but no decision has been made yet." Putin's attendance could prove to be a double-edged sword. It could very well be an opportunity for peace to be given a chance. India's role will be critical here. It is the president of the G20, and it shares a close relationship with Russia. Conversely, the summit could also witness some high-voltage confrontation. This will be the first time Putin will come face-to-face with President Biden after the Ukraine war broke out. European leaders will be present too. Putin gave a miss to the summit in Indonesia last year. But India's presidency has made the atmosphere a tad bit more conducive for Russia. A lot could change between now and September. But the thought of coming face-to-face with Putin might make many in the West uncomfortable.
Let's talk about Pakistan now. It is fighting a war too. A war against the Pakistani Taliban. And Rawalpindi is losing this battle. It is struggling to contain the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, or the TTP, the Pakistani Taliban. These terrorists are making advances thanks to the US. Let me explain. You may remember America's hasty exit from Afghanistan. They left behind military equipment worth billions. These were weapons in possession of the civilian government. When it collapsed, they fell into the hands of the Taliban. And now those same weapons have reached the Pakistani Taliban. The TTP is using these American weapons against Pakistan's military forces. Pakistani soldiers are struggling to counter them. What kind of weapons do these terrorists have? Modern and sophisticated military equipment, things like night vision devices, advanced weapons, thermal weapon sights. The TTP is conducting nighttime ambushes. The province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa witnessed many of them recently. Terrorists are taking out policemen. In 2022, 118 police officers died in such attacks. Pakistani military camps have been targeted too. A local police officer shared an assessment. I have it with me. This is what he said. By using night vision devices, TTP militants can see easily and target police personnel performing their duties in the dark, while policemen cannot see them coming. The TTP has many more modern weapons in its arsenal. Some photographs have emerged. This is believed to be propaganda from the TTP, the Pakistani Taliban. You can see the terrorists holding practice sessions here. And what kind of military equipment do they have? Again, these are American weapons like M24 sniper rifles, M4 carbines, rifles, rocket launchers, submachine guns. These terrorists are now as well equipped as any military. For Pakistan, the beast they fed is coming back to bite them. The Pakistani state has armed terrorists for years, remember. They nurtured the Taliban, kept it alive and enabled its comeback. Now those same terrorists are striking back. The TTP pledges allegiance to the Taliban in Afghanistan. They're using the Afghan soil to launch attacks on Pakistan. The vicious cycle continues. It was set in motion by the Americans. They recruited Pakistan in the late 1970s. The Soviets, remember, had invaded Afghanistan. The Americans armed Pakistan to counter Soviet Russia. It armed the Mujahideen. When the Soviets left, the armed Mujahideen morphed into the Taliban. In the next 2 decades, more weapons were pumped into Afghanistan. America fought a war that it lost. And those same weapons are now in the hands of terrorists. They're not just a threat for Pakistan, they're a threat for India too and the rest of the world. Reports say American weapons found their way into Kashmir as well, the Indian Union territory of Jammu and Kashmir. Terrorists there are using American weapons. So American weapons are fueling more conflicts. And it's not like the US has not suffered the consequences, but it continues to sell more weapons. A new report has come out, in fact. It says America was the top arms seller in 2022, and it has strengthened its position. Let's, in fact, look at the global arms exports. Earlier, America's share in this market was 33%. Now it has grown to 40%. It's an increase of 7%. As expected, the surge is due to the war in Ukraine. It is driving up weapons sales, especially in Europe. Europe's imports of major arms have shot up by 47%. So the US is the clear beneficiary. Russia, meanwhile, is losing out. Russia's share has fallen from 22% to 16%, again due to the war in Ukraine. And these numbers will rise in the foreseeable future. After Afghanistan, the American war machine needed a new conflict. It has found one in Ukraine. And now let's look at what's going on in the Korean Peninsula. Tensions between North and South Korea are skyrocketing. The North says it fired strategic cruise missiles from a submarine on Sunday. Strategic means the missiles are capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. The launch came just before South Korea and the US began their biggest joint drills in 5 years. The drill started today and will last for 11 days. These drills are basically a show of force. They're a warning to Pyongyang to stop its arms rush. And the drills also help reassure South Koreans that Uncle Sam has their back. But how effective are they? Are the North Koreans going to toe the line? It seems quite unlikely. North Korean state media released images of the submarine cruise missile launch today. 5 photos purportedly show nuclear-capable missiles being launched from a submarine. If true, this will be the first known instance of Pyongyang launching cruise missiles from sea. It would also be the first time North Korea launched multiple missiles from a submarine. North Korean media claim the missiles could strike targets 1,500 kilometers away, which means American bases in Japan are within attack range. Of course, most North Korean claims are to be taken with a pinch of salt. That's what South Korea's military spokesperson said after the launches.
Yesterday, our military detected an unspecified missile which was launched from a submarine in the waters of North Korea's Simpo yesterday morning. South Korean and US intelligence agencies are working to analyze the specifics. What North Korea claimed and the fact that we analyzed are different.
The launches come 4 days after Pyongyang shared images of a missile test. North Korea's Kim Jong-un also ordered intensified drills for quote-unquote a real war. Clearly, the US-South Korea drills aren't cowing the North down. Reports say it's having the opposite impact, in fact. North Korea has been using drills as an excuse to escalate its own tests. State media agency KCNA released a video on Sunday. It showed Kim Jong-un meeting the top military brass. The media reported that, and I'm quoting, important practical deterrence measures were discussed here. Let me in fact quote further. The US imperialists and South Korean puppet forces are getting ever more undisguised in their anti-democratic People's Republic of Korea military maneuvers. The North is using the drills as an excuse to ramp up arms tests. This comes at a time when millions in the Hermit Kingdom are starving. Nothing like a foreign enemy to unite a troubled population, after all. And if that's the case, why are the US and South Korea adding fuel to the fire? After all, drills were cancelled or scaled down during the last few years. This was when talks were on to de-escalate tensions. But all of that has changed last year. Pyongyang conducted a record number of missile tests in 2022. And they continue this year as well. Experts say this is for leverage during negotiations. The North wants to be declared an official nuclear power. It wants sanctions to stop. Sanctions have crippled its economy and left its population starving. The missiles are a way for North Korea to negotiate from a position of strength. But this strategy is not working, not yet. It has spooked the South. Polls say 70% of South Koreans support developing nuclear weapons of their own. The mayor of Seoul says denuclearization sentiments are changing.
북한이 전술 핵무기 소형 경량화에 성공을 해서
Now that North Korea has nearly succeeded in miniaturizing and making lighter tactical nuclear weapons and secured at least dozens of warheads, we've come to a point where it's difficult to convince people of the rationale that we should refrain from developing nuclear weapons and stick to the course of denuclearization.
이제 더 이상 국민들을 설득하기가 힘든 시점이 왔습니다.
So could South Korea once again host nuclear weapons? Remember, the US stationed nukes in South Korea till 1991. President Yoon Suk-yeol had said in 2021 that he would ask the US to redeploy them. Nuclear weapons in South Korea. We're not sure if that will happen. But when tensions and hostility around the world are so high, another nuclear face-off is the last thing our planet needs. It was a historic day for India at the Oscars. RRR chartbuster Natu Natu, that had the entire world grooving to its beats, won the Best Original Song, and The Elephant Whisperer won the Best Documentary Shorts category. This is the first time India has won in either category. These surely are big wins. Indians are proud and elated, no doubt, and with good reason, when Deepika Padukone announced Natu Natu, calling it a banger on the Oscars stage. Many of us already knew this. After all, India's film industry is huge. It was a $1.2 billion industry last year. So here's a question. Do we really need an Oscar to validate our films? What does an Oscar win mean for us? And is it helpful? Remember, the Oscars are going through a viewership crisis too. Is Indian cinema really helping them more than they can help us? Here's a report.
All right. Are you guys ready? Ooh! RRR! RRR!
RRR super hit track Natu Natu has become a global sensation. Today, it achieved a historic feat. The captivating song won an Oscar for Best Original Song, beating heavyweights like Lady Gaga and Rihanna. There's no doubt that the award is well-deserved and must be celebrated. But it triggers mixed feelings. Does India really need the Oscar approval? After all, the Academy has an ivory tower-ish approach to world cinema. Does this make it the better judge of all movies everywhere? We don't think so. Just look at today's anchor, Jimmy Kimmel. He referred to RRR as a Bollywood movie.
If you go too long, we're going to Bollywood gong show your ass. So let's get this going. Please welcome.
It's a Telugu language film from India's Tollywood industry. The description only reinforced misguided notions about Indian cinema. But that's okay. We'll reiterate a fact. All of Indian cinema is not Bollywood. And it's not all song and dance. Now let's talk about India's other win at the Oscars, The Elephant Whisperer. It emerged as the winner in the Best Documentary Shorts category. It tells the story of an indigenous couple as they care for an orphaned baby elephant. It also made history.
I stand here today to speak for the sacred bond between us and our natural world, for the respect of indigenous communities, and empathy towards other living beings we share our space with, and finally, for coexistence.
But the 2022 Indian documentary feature, All That Breathes, did not win today. It has been critically hailed. It was nominated in the Best Documentary Feature Film category. And don't take us the wrong way. This is not a case of sour grapes. Because 2 out of 3 strikes is pretty good. But does this not beg the question, does Hollywood like India in a certain way?
From Slumdog Millionaire to The Elephant Whisperer, do movies that show India in a specific light get to win? Everything that looks exotic and third world seems to have a place on the Oscar stage when nominated. And that's another thing, the nomination. A lot of good foreign films don't get nominated. Observers say that films spending anywhere between 3 to 10 million on promotions were nominated. The RRR team spent $9.7 million to lobby for a push at the Oscars. Over the years, certain countries have garnered attention in the foreign films category, but they're mainly from Europe, while others are neglected. Over 74 years, the Oscar has gone to a European nation 58 times. And this is not for the lack of trying by other nations. Lower-income countries rarely crack the list, let alone win an Oscar. 5 African countries have been represented. 3 have won. 2 of them were directed by Europeans, and the third by a white South African. Sometimes, movies are not considered international enough, like when they contain too much use of the English language. There was outrage when a Nigerian movie was rejected in 2020 for this reason. But English is the official language of the country. The Oscars are not without a cultural bias. Also, look at the paucity of female nominees in the Best Director category. This year has an all-male slate. Or look at the 2015 movement, or hashtag #OscarsSoWhite. It brought the sheer lack of racial diversity to the fore. An example of this is today's big win for Asia, if it can be called that. Everything Everywhere All at Once won, well, Everything Everywhere All at Once. It scored multiple awards including Best Picture, Best Director and Best Actress. It was a historic win for Michelle Yeoh. She is the first Asian to win for Best Actress. She had an important message.
For all the little boys and girls who look like me watching tonight, this is a beacon of hope and possibilities. This is proof that dreams dream big and dreams do come true.
And for women of color, it does seem like a dream come true. Yeoh is only the second Asian woman to ever be nominated, also the second woman of color to win in this category. The lack of diversity at the Oscars is staggering. Now remember, the Oscars have been facing a viewership crisis. Could this be one of the reasons? The ratings continue to pale in comparison to those of yesteryear, and the slaps on stage can't seem to save it. The numbers started dropping 5 years ago. Since then, they've seen a 37% decline each year. And it's no secret that viewership increases when popular films are nominated. So maybe nominating a movie like RRR helped them? Despite all of this, why do we continue to lobby for an Oscar win? Because it opens up the world market for films, especially for films confined largely to India. They're famous in a few Far Eastern countries, but they're yet to tap the lucrative Western markets, which is great. We hope they do. But the internationalization of the Oscars does more harm than good. National film industries begin aspiring to gain Hollywood standards. They want similar popularity. And this could sound idealistic, but it's not. The real cinematic gems are often in more marginalized cinemas of countries across the world. Validation to be good.
And finally, it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. We're starting with the US. Hundreds of migrants tried to enter the country from Mexico. They're mostly Venezuelans. Men tried to make their way through barbed fences. Women were crying and pleading. Their attempts were futile, but it goes on to show the desperation and helplessness. In France, strikes against pension reform plans continue. A fuel depot was blocked, which caused disruptions. Australia is witnessing floods, and the wildlife is bearing the brunt. Rescue efforts are on. Unlike Australia, animals are happy in Thailand. It is their National Elephant Day, and elephants are feasting on bananas. We're leaving you with these images. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.
favor, queremos respuestas. La aplicación. When it comes to an issue related to the institution of marriage, then it is a matter of policy. Personal freedom and personal activities of individuals, of the citizens, are never been questioned, disturbed or regulated by government.
Government continues to maintain that it's a policy matter best left to the parliament, and the LGBTQ community and the activists have been pushing for equal rights in India. In 2014, the Supreme Court of India laid down the groundwork by giving legal recognition to non-binary and transgender persons as a third gender. That was a milestone and a revolutionary step. In 2017, it strengthened the right to privacy and also recognized sexual orientation as an essential attribute of individuals' privacy and dignity, part of Article 21. In 2018, the Supreme Court in a landmark judgment decriminalized homosexuality, thereby overturning a British colonial-era law and, more importantly, overturning its own judgment. In 2022, the Apex Court instituted protection for what it called atypical families. It's a broad category that includes, for example, single parents, blended families, kinship relationships, and arguably even same-sex couples. The court said that such non-traditional manifestations of family are equally deserving of benefits under various social welfare schemes. Let's come to another aspect. Why is the LGBTQ community fighting for these civic rights? Why is it important for them? Why are they seeking any kind of legal validity to their partnership? Well, gay couples can't have joint bank accounts because they are not married per se, quote unquote. No financial investments can be made by the same-sex couples together. Well, they can't even sign medical forms for each other in case of a medical emergency because medical form can only be signed by a family member. Legal recognition may help them grant rights to adopt, have property together, and much more. Well, is the community justified in having these demands? Is India ready for this kind of change? There are
Hello and welcome to the Late Night Edition with me, Ayushman Singh Jamwal. There is an all-out war in Parliament as part of the political fallout of Rahul Gandhi's remarks in the United Kingdom, where he claimed that Indian democracy is being weakened under the Modi government. Rahul Gandhi said dissent was being muzzled in India, while every democratic institution has been captured to target the opposition. On Sunday, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, without naming Rahul Gandhi, slammed those denigrating Indian democracy abroad, calling it an all-out attack on India's rising global image. That same line was taken by union ministers in both houses of parliament on day one of the second leg of the budget session, demanding an apology from the Congress MP. The Congress party has come out in full defense of Rahul Gandhi, claiming he spoke the truth in London and has accused the BJP of trying to derail any debate on policy matters.
राहुल गांधी ने लंदन में जाकर
भारत को बदनाम करने की कोशिश की। थोड़ा कुछ भी शर्म है तो राहुल गांधी इस सदन में आके माफी मांगना चाहिए।
The second leg of the budget session of Parliament kicked off on a fiery note.
राहुल गांधी का बयान देश का अपमान है। राहुल गांधी का बयान देश का अपमान है।
This time, the trigger was Congress MP Rahul Gandhi's recent visit to the United Kingdom.
राजनाथ सिंह जी,
The BJP claims Rahul Gandhi insulted India from abroad.
अध्यक्ष महोदय, मैं आपसे यह मांग करता हूं कि पूरे सदन के द्वारा उनके इस व्यवहार को कंडम किया जाना चाहिए और उनको ये आपके द्वारा निर्देश दिया जाना चाहिए कि संसद के फोरम पर आकर वह क्षमा याचना करें। अध्यक्ष महोदय,
एक विपक्षी नेता विदेशी देश में जाकर और भारत के लोकतंत्र पे अनाप शराब बातें करते हैं।
The Congress defended Rahul Gandhi's statements and said there is nothing to apologize for.
And leader of the House himself raised the issue of Rahul Gandhi. So it is their mistake. He is not a House member of our House. How can he apologize in Rajya Sabha?
He only talks in terms of this being an Indian problem that Indians would solve and that others need to be aware of it. That's all he said. To be shocked.
During his week-long visit to the UK, Rahul Gandhi met members of the UK Parliament and the diaspora and said democracy is under attack in India.
The BJP responds, right? It's not interested in a conversation. They've decided that they know what's going on. Nobody else in the country understands what's going on. And that's it.
As the war of words escalates between the centre and the Congress, who is really rattled here?
And shifting focus away from politics, it's a golden Monday for India after creating history at the Oscars. The much-acclaimed song Natu Natu from S.S. Rajmouli's blockbuster RRR grabbed the award for Best Original Song. Composer M.M. Keerwani received the award on behalf of the entire team. In another proud moment for the country, Guneet Monga and Kartiki Gonzalez backed the Oscar for Best Documentary Short Film, The Elephant Whisperers. Prime Minister Narendra Modi congratulated both teams, saying the entire nation is elated and proud. This is a new benchmark for Indian cinema on the world stage and a huge boost to a vibrant and talented industry.
Napata sudu natu 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 veera natu
A country known for its song and dance. But not once has a song from an Indian film won at the Academy Awards. On March 13th, history was made at the 95th Academy Awards.
RRR!
Natu Natu from RRR won for Best Original Song, and an elated composer-lyricist duo, M. Keeravani and Chandra Bose, received the coveted golden statuettes.
Thank you, Academy. I grew up listening to the Carpenters, and now here I am with the Oscars.
Aja aja jind shami aane ke tale aja zari wale neele aasmaane ke tale
While Rehman and Gulzar have won for Jai Ho from Slumdog Millionaire in 2009, this is the first song from an Indian film to be awarded at the Oscars. And this time the win doesn't feel like a one-off. The sheer excitement RRR caused in the West over the last few months indicates a shift in the film world order. With the West looking to us now, it opens the avenues of Indian cinema to the world.
This going and people dancing in the Greek theatre or whatever, China theatre, is a huge achievement. And so they're not like apologetic about dancing, with a Telugu beat or Indian beat. They're like, well, this is my movie, and then it's a cinematic. So people appreciate for what it is, and that's a huge thing.
A peppy tune, a catchy hook, intricate choreography, and a performance that was perfected painstakingly. Make no mistake, this win was no fluke. Ram Charan and NTR Jr. practiced for days in Ukraine under strict taskmaster Rajamouli. We all know how in sync the two of you are.
I mean, look, I've been looking at those legs.
I know.
Look at that.
I feel even the trousers are doing the same thing.
I think you were made to 18 takes, 20 takes?
Yeah, similar.
No, we even stopped counting takes.
You
It
was
stopped.
hours.
Okay, you just
It was
stopped.
hours. Because that's, you see that perfection there?
Did you were in Ukraine, you had time to enjoy the city, you had time
No,
to
we
enjoy
didn't.
Ukraine?
No, we didn't. We started at 8 in the morning.
Ended
We
8 in the
ended at
night.
8 in the night, and Ukraine shuts by 7:55.
Deepika Padukone introduced Natu Natu at the Dolby Theatre to exalted cheers. Singers Rahul Sipligunj and Kala Bhairava put up a performance that was worthy of the standing ovation. The authenticity of the folk genre and the expanse of Rajamouli's vision propelled RRR onto the biggest global stage in entertainment. Hollywood A-listers championed the film and their enthusiasm was infectious.
Spectacular moment for Indian cinema, broadly Telugu cinema. Do you see this as a big turning point?
Of course, I think every time there's someone who pushes the boundary, I think it's the last time also it's been Rajamouli, where he's got India together as a cinematic nation. Now he's broken some international barriers, and it's just, I've been up since 5 o'clock watching the live, which is why I still sound groggy. But